I heard the tree snap right behind me before I saw it. Every stomp made my bike chain jump, the rear tire sliding over wet stone, while whatever was in the forest stayed close, as if it knew exactly where I would turn. I had just cleared the bend when a giant Bigfoot shot across the road, taller than any man I had ever seen, its arms hanging almost to its knees. I hit the brakes and nearly flew over the handlebars. Behind me, a second set of footsteps sounded. "Hello everyone, I'm Victor. Today we're going into a strange disappearance from the deep forests of Washington state. Our editorial team collected and compiled this story from forums, personal, blogs, local accounts, missing person documents, and Bigfoot research communities. However, we cannot verify whether this was a real event, an exaggerated story, or only a modern legend. So listen with an open mind. If you believe Sasquatch could exist, comment, believe." Ryan Foster, 34 years old, was a drone control engineer living in Tacoma, Washington. On an early October afternoon, he chose to ride alone on Forest Service Road 68, an old logging road near the edge of Olympic National Forest. Ryan only intended to record autumn forest scenery with the GoPro mounted on his helmet, then return before dark. But the ordinary ride quickly became a chain of signs he could not explain. Stones were repeatedly thrown from the mountainside. A huge creature stood watching between the trees. Something heavy moved parallel with Ryan, changing speed with every push of his pedals. On the way back, a newly fallen tree blocked the road, and a fur-covered arm appeared for less than half a second. Ryan tried to escape, only to realize he was being chased by at least two creatures working together. The GoPro he threw away continued recording after he disappeared. 3 hours later, a Bigfoot stepped into frame, picked up the camera, looked directly into the lens, and deliberately covered it. Ryan was never found. Before we begin the main part of the story, comment below with the city or state where you live. If you have ever encountered something you could not explain in the woods, share your experience. Now let's return to the final afternoon Ryan Foster was seen alive. On Friday morning, October 8, Ryan Foster sat before 3 monitors at Cascade Terrain Mapping in Olympia, his eyes moving between topographic maps, elevation data, and drone images sent back from a landslide area near Aberdeen. The job suited Ryan because it required patience, focus, and the habit of checking details other people usually missed. When the software marked the survey results as complete, he still zoomed in on each suspicious area and found an error at the edge of a slope, where the elevation was off by only a few inches but enough to affect the technical report. Melissa Grant, his co-worker at the desk across from him, looked over and said he always found what the machines missed. Ryan smiled, corrected the numbers, and kept working as if it were just another normal step. Melissa asked if he was joining the team for drinks that weekend. Ryan shook his head and said he planned to bike an old forest road. Daniel Wu heard that and joked that Ryan took better care of his Trek Fuel EX than he did his relationships. Ryan replied that at least the bike didn't make him talk when there was nothing worth saying, which made all 3 of them laugh. On Ryan's desk lay an old paper map. Melissa recognized the mark for Forest Service Road 68 and remembered her father once saying that route had been abandoned after the logging operation stopped. Ryan explained the road was not closed, it simply was no longer maintained, and the high point at the end of the route might give him a view over the forest stretching toward Quinault. Daniel offered to go with him, but Ryan said he wanted a few quiet hours alone. Before leaving work, he checked the weather forecast, sunset time, and downloaded offline maps onto his phone. That night, Ryan charged 2 GoPro batteries, checked his bike lights, patched the saddle, bag, and placed his personal locator device beside his backpack. When he noticed the device was not fully charged, he left it on the table, believing a short ride near inhabited roads did not require it. On his laptop screen, the satellite image showed an oval-shaped patch of forest missing tall tree data. Ryan looked at it for a few seconds, assumed it was a stitching error, and closed the computer. On Saturday afternoon, Ryan drove his Toyota Tacoma toward the Olympic Peninsula, in the pale early October sunlight, his mountain bike tied securely in the truck bed, and his mood lighter after a stressful week of work. Near Amanda Park, he stopped at an old gas station, with a low awning, faded advertisements, and a coffee machine beside the checkout counter. The man behind the counter was Walter Briggs, in his 60s, writing inventory numbers in a thick ledger. Ryan filled the tank, bought coffee, and asked for directions to Forest Service Road, 68. The pen in Walter's hand stopped in the middle of the page. He looked up, noticed the GoPro on the passenger seat, and asked whether Ryan planned to drive, hike, or bike. Ryan said he would ride up to the high point, watch the late light, and come back before dark. Walter asked if he was going with anyone. When Ryan shook his head, the station owner advised him to take Route 22 instead, where fishermen and ranger vehicles still passed through. Ryan thought he was worried about bears or mountain lions, so he asked whether there were many dangerous animals near Road 68. Walter set down the pen and said bears had never been the reason he avoided that road. Two hunters sitting near the window both turned to look. One leaned forward slightly, as if about to speak, but the other lightly touched his arm. Walter explained that the route had once served logging crews, then had been abandoned. The forest above it had become different since then. Ryan asked whether he meant fallen trees, slides, or squatters. Walter only answered that the road no longer seemed to belong to the people who had opened it. At that moment, Lily, Walter's 10-year-old granddaughter, stepped out from the back room and looked at the map on Ryan's phone. She asked if he was going through the road with the Knox. Walter immediately told her to go back inside, then wrote the station phone number on the back of Ryan's receipt and handed it to him. He told Ryan to call immediately if his truck broke down or if he returned late. Ryan thanked him, put the receipt in his jacket pocket, and left. When the Tacoma disappeared around the bend, one hunter asked why Walter had not told him about the logging crew in 1997. Walter looked at the clock and said people who did not believe usually went deeper in order to prove themselves right. Ryan reached the small dirt parking area at the start of Forest Service Road 68 at 4:20 p.m., just as the sunlight began slanting low through the pines and the stream beside the road reflected a pale gold color. The parking area had only enough space for a few vehicles. A faded road sign leaned to one side, and damp maple leaves mixed with gravel almost covered the entrance. Mark and Elaine Pearson were putting fishing rods into their old Subaru when they saw Ryan back his truck to the edge of the lot, open the rear bed, and lower his mountain bike. He checked tire pressure, tightened the axle locks, mounted the GoPro on his helmet, and tested the front light twice. Elaine looked at her watch and reminded him that under the canopy it would get dark faster than on the main road. Ryan said he would only ride 6 or 7 miles, reach the high point for the evening view, then come back down. Mark asked if he had bear spray. Ryan pointed to the canister clipped to his backpack strap and said he had ridden emptier roads than this. Mark said that when he and Elaine arrived to fish at noon, they had heard 3 very hard knocks echoing from deep in the woods, too even to believe they were falling branches. Ryan said someone might have been cutting wood on the other side of the mountain. Elaine asked if they should wait until he came back, but Ryan laughed and said he would return before they even found a place for dinner. He turned on the GoPro, read the date and time, filmed the Road 68 sign, and introduced the ride as his first attempt on the old logging route. Before leaving, Ryan sent Melissa a short message saying he had started the ride and would send video if the scenery looked good. The message left his screen, but no reply appeared. The dash camera in Mark's vehicle was still recording, unintentionally capturing the exact moment Ryan left the lot, and the color of the jacket he was wearing, a detail that later became the last evidence confirming he had been alive that day. Mark stood beside the car and watched Ryan pedal through the partly open metal gate. On the back side of the gate, a bundle of pine branches had been crossed into an X, but from Ryan's angle he did not see it. When his figure vanished between the lines of trees, Elaine heard a deep knock from inside the forest. A few seconds later, a second knock answered from the opposite mountainside, closer to the place Ryan had just passed. The opening GoPro footage looked completely normal, so normal that anyone watching later found it hard to believe disaster had already been close to Ryan from the beginning. The forest road stretched beneath gray gravel. On both sides stood old pines, mixed with maples turning yellow and red. Late afternoon sunlight passed through the canopy, forming slow patches of light across Ryan's jacket as he pedaled steadily forward. He spoke to the camera in a relaxed voice, saying, "The autumn colors were better than expected, and that the air in the forest made the ride worth it." Ryan stopped beside a large maple tree to take photos, drank a few sips of water, and checked the map on his phone. The route was emptier than he had expected, but he treated that as a good thing because he did not have to avoid off-road vehicles or hikers. On the road were deer tracks, a dry pile of bear scat, and several old claw marks on a tree trunk. Ryan pointed them out to the camera one by one, explaining which signs were fresh and which had been left days earlier. That calmness showed he understood the forest well enough to recognize ordinary dangers. When he crossed a narrow wooden bridge over a drainage cut, Ryan heard a deep clack from the mountainside. He slowed, tilted his head to listen, then continued riding, assuming a large branch had broken somewhere. A few minutes later, the birds around the road became fewer. Ryan did not notice right away because the sound of the tires and chain stayed steady. Only when a raven suddenly burst from the canopy on his left did he look up. At that moment, the camera swept across a thick patch of brush. In less than a second, a large, dark shape retreated between two pines. But Ryan was watching the road ahead and missed the movement. He stopped to check the time and decided he would turn around at 5:15 to avoid riding downhill in the dark. As soon as he continued, the microphone recorded a deep breath from close behind the camera. Ryan did not hear it. About half a minute later, a small stone rolled down from the slope and stopped directly in front of his front tire. Ryan squeezed the brake, looked down at the stone, then lifted his eyes toward the silent trees. Ryan braked just enough for the front wheel to stop a few inches from the stone. He put one foot down and stared up the fern-covered hillside, where pine trunks grew tightly together. There was no slide, no broken branch, no sign that the stone had fallen naturally. After watching for several seconds, Ryan shrugged, pedaled on, and assumed a squirrel or deer had knocked it from the slope. 3 minutes later, the second stone came. This one moved faster, struck the rear wheel, and made the bike wobble toward the road edge. Ryan gripped the handlebar, pulled his body inward, and kept balance before the tire slid off the gravel. He stopped completely, turned the camera toward the trees, and loudly asked if anyone was up there. The question echoed over the mountainside, stretched between the trunks, then faded into silence. Ryan looked around the road and noticed the stone that had hit the bike was dry, while the soil and leaves around it were still damp from the previous night's rain. That small detail changed the relaxed expression on his face. He leaned the bike against the slope, removed one glove, and used his phone to zoom in on the forest above. The screen showed only overlapping darkness, with no clear human shape or movement. Ryan considered the possibility that local teenagers were messing with him, so he spoke more firmly, saying the camera was recording and one bad throw could cause an accident. The moment he finished speaking, a third stone flew across the road at knee height and landed in the brush on the other side. Its trajectory made Ryan stand still. He took out his rescue whistle and blew 3 short blasts to announce his location. A few seconds later, from deep in the forest, 3 heavy knocks answered in the exact same rhythm. Ryan frowned and tried 2 more whistle blasts. 2 knocks answered immediately. He looked at his watch, then at the road behind him, and began considering turning back. At that moment, a fist-sized stone shot straight out of the tree line, struck the rear wheel hard, and forced the bike to tilt dangerously close to the slope edge. Ryan yanked it back, looked up, and shouted that he was leaving. From far away, a thick sound echoed back, drawn out almost like a person repeating his final word, somewhere inside the forest. Ryan's watch showed 5:12 when he decided to end the ride. The viewpoint was still nearly a mile away, but the repeated stones and the sound imitating a human voice had stripped the original goal of all meaning. He told the GoPro that someone was throwing rocks from the hillside and that he was heading back before the light dropped too low. As he turned the front wheel, the camera swept across the forest on the left. Between 2 pines more than 100 meters from the road, a massive figure stood upright, rising above the brush around it. Its broad shoulders formed a dark shape almost blending with the trunks, and its dark brown fur only became visible where the evening light touched the edge of its spots. Ryan was looking down at the pedal and completely missed it. When the bike started rolling downhill, the creature tilted its head in the direction he was moving, then lowered its body. From then on, the stones stopped, leaving behind a silence that made Ryan look over his shoulder more often than before. He told himself the rock thrower had probably gotten what he wanted. But just as the sentence left his mouth, branches began pressing aside in the forest on his left. The sound kept pace with the bike. Ryan slowed his pedaling. The noise slowed too. He accelerated across a flat stretch of gravel. The impacts in the brush immediately came faster. Ryan gripped the handlebar tightly, stopped in the middle of the road, and stared into the dark spaces beneath the canopy. The source of the sound stopped after one final heavy step, close enough that he heard dry leaves sink under its weight. Ryan pulled out the bear spray, held it at chest height, and called out that he only wanted to leave the area. No voice answered, but a small tree shook about 30 meters away. He tried calling 911, but the screen showed no signal. The message he had sent, Melissa, still had no reply. Ryan put the phone away, lowered himself over the handlebar, and began pedaling downhill faster. In the forest, the giant shape also moved with long strides, keeping an even distance from him. Ryan had just passed a narrow curve when he burned the brakes. A large tree lay across the entire road, even though this same place had been clear on the way up, blocking his path completely. Ryan squeezed the brakes so hard the rear wheel slid sideways over the wet gravel, leaving a long mark before the bike stopped in front of the fallen tree. He stepped down, held the bike with one hand, and approached the broken base. The trunk was nearly half a meter wide, and the brake sat about chest height. The freshly exposed wood was still pale, and sap was bleeding down the bark. Ryan clearly remembered that this bend had been open when he rode up, because he had slowed here to avoid a large rock near the road edge. He tried pulling several smaller branches aside, but the weight of the trunk only made the whole set tremble. On the right was a steep slope covered in loose rock. On the left was a vertical bank. His only choice was to lift the bike over piece by piece. Ryan removed the saddlebag, water bottle, and auxiliary light to reduce the weight, then threaded the front wheel through a gap between 2 branches. Just as he bent to free the pedal caught on a dry limb, heavy footsteps sounded from the forest behind him. The sound was slow, even, and much closer than before. Ryan froze, head tilted to listen. A sudden heavy thud struck the ground, like something had jumped down from a low ledge into wet leaves. He spun around. The GoPro caught only a brown furred arm pulling quickly behind a pine trunk. The hand appeared for less than half a second, but its long fingers, clear joints, and sideways. Thumb left Ryan motionless. The water bottle slipped from his hand and rolled into the roadside ditch. He left it there. Ryan grabbed the bike frame and yanked the rear wheel over the trunk. The pedal caught again, forcing him to pull harder until the chain jumped off the gear and slapped against the metal frame. Deep breathing sounded among the trees, so close that Ryan felt the rhythm vibrating inside his chest. When the bike finally cleared the obstacle, 2 stones dropped onto the road, one behind the trunk, the other in front of Ryan's wheel, forming a clear boundary. He mounted the bike and pedaled downhill, even though the chain kept jumping and the handlebar shook hard over the gravel. Behind him, the fallen tree shook violently as something large climbed over it without slowing down much at all. Ryan shot down the long slope, both hands locked on the handlebar while the tires bounced over loose stone. The chain had jumped off the gear, making every pedal stroke produce a dry metallic sound, sometimes catching, sometimes slipping, forcing him to constantly adjust pressure to keep speed. Behind him, branches snapped in, bursts through the forest on his left, running parallel with the road as if the creature were cutting straight across the mountainside instead of following each curve. Ryan glanced over his shoulder, but the GoPro recorded only shaking tree trunks and dark patches slipping between leaves. He tried to pedal faster. The sound in the woods sped up too, heavy but precise, holding the same distance from him. When the road opened onto a slick strip of gravel, the rear wheel slid sideways, nearly throwing Ryan into the bank. He pulled the handlebar back, lowered his body, and kept racing downhill. The phone in his jacket pocket vibrated faintly with each jolt. Ryan pulled it out with one hand and tried calling 911 again, but the screen still showed no signal. The phone slipped from his sweaty fingers, hit the road, and slid toward the drainage ditch. Ryan braked and turned back almost by instinct, because the maps, coordinates, and only chance of contact were all in that device. He had just bent down to pick it up when a rotten log rolled hard from the slope and stopped right beside his boot. Ryan snatched the phone, jumped onto the bike, and pedaled on before he could clearly see what had pushed the log. He turned on the front light, even though it was not fully dark yet, then used voice command to start an audio recording. Between frantic breaths, Ryan read his name, described his estimated location, and said a large creature walking on 2 legs was following him through the woods. The sound behind him gradually moved from the left to directly behind him, making him understand it was closing in on the road. Then suddenly, everything went silent. Ryan kept pedaling several dozen meters, hearing only the bike chain and his own breathing. He slowed, believing he had finally gained distance. At that exact moment, a tree crashed down ahead at the dark bend below. A giant black shadow crossed the road and vanished between the pines. Ryan locked the brakes so hard the rear tire slid sideways, scraping a long trail through the gravel before the bike stopped. The black shape had crossed too quickly for him to see clearly, but its height and arm span were nothing like a bear. Ryan turned to look behind him. The slope he had just descended was empty, while the sound of snapping branches came again from that direction, proving one creature had circled ahead and another source of movement was still behind him. He opened the offline map and saw an old logging branch dropping east, connecting near the creek before rejoining the main route. That choice seemed more reasonable than continuing toward the place where the dark figure had just appeared. Ryan leaned the bike into the side road, pedaling over thick moss and fallen branches. After only a few dozen meters, the road narrowed. Old tire marks vanished, and brush on both sides scraped constantly against his jacket. He kept going because the map clearly showed a connector ahead. About 300 meters later, Ryan burst into an old logging yard and went still. The road ended there, facing a fern-covered slide slope with absolutely no path down to the creek like the data had shown. He turned the bike around, but the chain jammed between two gears. Ryan knelt, removed his gloves, and pulled at the chain with oil-covered fingers. As he bent close to the frame, a deep knock sounded from the path he had just entered. A few seconds later, a second knock answered from the slope on the far side of the clearing. Ryan lifted his head and slowly turned, realizing the two sounds had come from separate positions. The last light had thinned into narrow strips between the trees, making the clearing feel like a courtyard surrounded by invisible watchers. Near the forest edge, Ryan saw a circle of stones neatly arranged on the ground. Inside it lay a rotting hunting glove and a fairly new backpack buckle. He took a step toward it, then stopped when a low hiss sounded from the opposite tree line. Immediately, the knocking behind him stopped. In its place came heavy footsteps moving closer to the clearing. Ryan grabbed the handlebar and understood the side road he thought was an escape route had just led him into a trap. Ryan kept the bike close to his body, eyes moving constantly between the road he had entered and the opposite slope. The footsteps behind him advanced in slow beats, while another source of sound moved sideways, across the trees in front. Two separate rhythms, clearly offset from each other, made him understand he was being watched from more than one side. Ryan put the rescue whistle to his mouth and blew 3 short blasts. The forest stayed silent for a few seconds. Then 2 deep knocks sounded almost at the same time, one from the entrance road, the other from across the logging yard. He did not wait. At the edge of the clearing was an old skid trail dropping down the south slope, narrow but still aimed toward the creek shown on the map. Ryan dragged the bike into it, running while holding the handlebar to keep the front wheel from catching on roots. The terrain quickly became steeper. Wet leaves covered stones, and low branches kept striking his shoulder and helmet. The front wheel hit an exposed root, twisting the bike sideways and throwing Ryan onto one knee. Pain shot through his leg, but he only had time to push himself up and pull the bike forward before a large shadow moved between trees above him. Ryan shouted that he was leaving the area and did not want trouble. His words vanished into the forest, replaced by heavy breathing on his left. He picked up a long branch as a stick, checked the bear spray, and placed his finger on the trigger. The GoPro still blinked on his helmet, and the bike light shook across the ground. Ryan looked at his phone compass and estimated the creek was only about 800 meters away. If he reached the water, he could follow it back to the parking area. When he stepped through a soft patch of mud, he saw a huge footprint sunk deep beneath the leaves. It had 5 toes, a clear heel, and a length nearly twice that of his own shoe. Beside it was another print, smaller but still far beyond the size of an adult human foot. Ryan placed his own foot beside the large print for comparison. At that moment, a stone dropped exactly between the 2 prints, splashing mud onto his pant leg. A knock sounded from ahead. Then the heavy steps behind him sped up too. Ryan stared down at the shaking mud around the stone, his throat going dry as he understood the throw had been a warning. He wiped his hand on his shirt, picked up the phone, and mounted the bike, realizing the 2 creatures were taking turns keeping distance and forcing him down the only narrow path still open. Ryan continued, pushing the bike down the skid trail, trying to keep the front wheel from slipping out of the rut between roots. The earlier impact had bent the rim, causing the bike to pull left and rub against the fork every time he tried to move faster. Ryan stopped on a flat patch of ground, bent down, spun the wheel, and used his hands to bend the warped section back. Each rotation produced a dry metal sound that carried farther than normal in the almost dark forest. From behind a tree less than 20 meters away, a deep breath sounded. Ryan lifted his head, shoulders locking, one hand searching for the bear spray. He aimed toward the dark and pulled the trigger. An orange cloud blasted through the ferns, but wind from the ravine shifted and pushed most of the spray back toward him. Ryan turned his face away, but inhaled enough for his eyes to burn and his throat to clamp tight. He coughed repeatedly, tears running down his face, while his vision blurred into smears of light. In that moment, a heavy impact struck the ground. The bike was yanked from Ryan's hands, dragged almost 3 meters sideways, and tipped against the base of a tree. He backed away, wiped his eyes with his sleeve, and tried to see through the water covering his eyes. The bike frame still trembled, but the forest around it had gone silent again. Ryan stepped forward, lifted the bike, and found the rear wheel forced out of alignment, the derailleur jammed into the spokes. He tried pulling once. Metal snapped, and the branches above shook hard. From that moment, the bike was only heavy weight that revealed his position. Ryan removed the saddlebag, spare light, and last water bottle, stuffed them into his backpack, and left the bike on the trail. As soon as he turned away, a tall shadow stepped beside the frame. The creature bent, brought its face close to the handlebar, as if smelling the scent of Ryan's hands, then raised its head and looked straight at him. In the weak light, he saw clearly that it stood on 2 legs, with broad shoulders and arms too long for human proportions. Ryan tightened the backpack strap and ran toward the sound of water. Behind him, the creature stayed beside the bike, calmly watching. From the creek ahead, a deep knock sounded, announcing that something else was waiting on the escape route he had just chosen. Ryan ran downhill toward the creek, one hand holding the backpack strap, the other wiping tears from the bear spray burning his eyes. Wet leaves covered the ground, making every step threaten to slide out from under him on the twisted roots. He had to grab small trunks to keep balance. Behind him, branches broke in waves, slower than they had on the road, but maintaining a terrifying distance. Ryan understood one creature was following, while the knock ahead meant another was waiting near the creek. He kept moving downhill because turning back meant facing the huge figure beside the bike directly. When the sound of water grew clearer, Ryan crouched and stepped across a slick bank. He slid several feet, slammed his shoulder into a rock, and dropped to the creek edge. The stream was about 4 meters wide, freezing cold and moving hard over moss-covered stone. Ryan waded in to his knees, thinking the water might erase tracks and hide some of his body scent. He turned upstream, trying to step on large stones to reduce noise. After nearly 100 meters, a heavy impact sounded ahead. A large rock dropped into the middle of the stream, splashing water onto Ryan's chest and blocking the narrowest part of the route. The throw missed him by only a few feet, accurate enough to make him understand. This was an order. Ryan turned downstream. Another stone immediately dropped behind him, creating a second limit. The 2 creatures were controlling his direction while avoiding hitting him. Ryan climbed onto the right bank, swept his light over the ferns, and saw a large rotten tree trunk lying close to the ground. The space beneath it was wide enough to crawl into if he removed his backpack. He turned the light off first, removed the GoPro from his helmet to cover the red indicator, then set the camera low to the ground, pointing through the narrow gap between bark and mud. Ryan dragged the backpack in behind him, lay flat on his stomach, and kept one hand over his mouth so his breathing would not escape too loudly. Outside, heavy footsteps reached the creek bank and stopped. From the opposite side, another rhythm appeared, slow and steady. Ryan lay between the 2 sound sources, listening to water running over stone and his heart pounding into the earth. A giant foot stepped into the weak light in front of the lens, water dripping from its fur onto the mud. The creature stood less than 3 meters from his hiding place. A few minutes later, everything became still, but right above Ryan's head, the bark of the log made a light scratching sound, slow and deliberate. Ryan lay, pressed against the ground under the rotten trunk, one arm trapped beneath his chest, the other holding the phone so close that the screen lit only the mud in front of him. The scratching above continued in a slow, steady rhythm, as if the creature on top was testing the thickness of the trunk rather than trying to break it. Each time a nail dragged over the dry surface, flakes of bark fell into Ryan's hair and collar. He held his breath, but his chest began tightening from lack of air. The GoPro microphone, placed near the ground, clearly recorded each deep breath above him, long, heavy, almost human in rhythm, except for the strength of the vibration that made rotten leaves near the gap tremble. Ryan pressed his mouth into his sleeve, trying to soften his own breathing. A shadow covered the gap of light in front of him. Then a fur-covered finger slowly lowered and touched the mud just a few centimeters from the lens. It dragged a long line, leaving a deep groove, then lifted away. Ryan closed his eyes for a moment, but his body stiffened again when footsteps moved around the trunk and stopped exactly above his head. He slowly opened his phone, reduced brightness to the lowest level, and typed a message to Melissa containing only the road name, final coordinates, and a request to call police. The screen said it had not sent. Ryan saved it, placed the phone against his chest, and stared at the emergency alert icon, but the sound could turn his hiding place into a clear target. Above him, the creature scratched once more, then stopped completely. The silence lasted so long that Ryan began hearing his own heartbeat through the ground. From very far away, a deep knock sounded in the forest. The creature on the log answered with one light knock against the bark, then its weight shifted. Footsteps retreated toward the creek and vanished into the water. Ryan remained still for many minutes, waiting for his shaking muscles to move again. When he tilted his head to look through the narrow gap, the forest ahead was empty. However, in the mud around the trunk was a ring of enormous footprints, and the direction of departure left no tracks at all, making Ryan understand the creature was still close. Ryan stayed under the trunk for almost 15 more minutes, long, enough for cold mud to seep through his jacket and stiffen his fingers. Outside, only water ran steadily over stone, interrupted now and then by a very soft leaf falling. The long quiet made him start to believe the two creatures had left the area. Ryan checked the GoPro battery and saw about 40% remaining, while his phone was at 28%. He knew he could not stay there until full dark. After listening a little longer, Ryan slowly crawled backward out of the gap, keeping the camera close to his chest and checking every direction before standing. The forest was completely empty. He walked along the creek bank, placing his feet very slowly on hard ground to reduce noise. The first 50 meters passed without a shaking branch or a knock from the mountain. Downstream, a brighter strip of sky appeared between the trunks, making Ryan think the creek was about to cut across Road 68. The thought gave him his first real hope since leaving the bike behind. He sped up, ducking low to pass through a large fern patch. Right behind him, a branch that had been pinned flat to the ground suddenly sprang up, snapping against dry leaves. Ryan turned and saw a brown-black mass rising from the forest floor. The creature had been lying flat, blending into mud and shadow so completely that he had just walked past only a few steps away. The Bigfoot stood upright, nearly a full meter taller than Ryan's shoulder, then began running on two legs. It held a distance of about 10 meters, close enough for each step to shake the ground but still, not reaching out to grab him. Ryan threw his water bottle behind him. The creature leaned aside with a clean, precise motion and kept driving him along the creek bank. Ryan realized the earlier silence had only been its way of waiting for him to leave hiding on his own. He burst through a sparse patch of trees, intending to cut down toward the road below. From the opposite bank, the second creature stepped out, blocking the only route back to the main line. Its long arms hung low, and its eyes followed every movement. Ryan understood the circle had never fully disappeared. Ryan stopped in the open patch of forest, both feet sinking into damp mud as the creature behind him came out of the trees. For the first time, he saw its full shape. Late light slid over its fur, revealing the huge body in the quiet clearing. The Bigfoot was more than 8 feet tall, broad-shouldered, thick-chested, with long arms hanging near the knees. Brown-black fur covered its body, with silver strands over the shoulder area. Its face was flatter than a bear's, with a low forehead and deep-set eyes under a heavy brow, all of them fixed on Ryan. On the opposite bank, the second creature stepped down from a mound of dirt. It was shorter than the larger one, leaner, covered in reddish-brown fur, and moved with quick precision. Ryan shifted one step right. The smaller one shifted with him immediately. He backed up. The larger one stepped forward, closing the distance without needing to accelerate. The way they coordinated made Ryan understand he was standing inside a calculated ring. He slowly raised both hands and tried to keep his voice calm as he said he would leave the area. The bear spray was still in his right hand, so Ryan bent down, placed it on the ground, and stepped back. The large one looked at the canister, then lifted its eyes to him and released a low vibration from its chest. The smaller creature immediately retreated half a step, reacting so quickly that Ryan understood there was a clear order between them. He removed his backpack, threw it left, then spun and ran right. Both creatures kept their eyes on Ryan, almost ignoring the bag that had fallen. The smaller one cut across ahead of him, while the larger one advanced from behind, forcing Ryan to stop. When the distance was only a little more than 10 meters, he could clearly hear their breathing blending with the creek below. The smaller one turned its head toward the deep forest and released a short sound, almost like a call. From far away, a weaker answer echoed through the trees. Ryan felt his throat go dry, because that meant there was at least one more creature nearby. The larger Bigfoot slowly stepped aside, revealing a narrow trail leading into a rock gully. Ryan looked at the path it had opened, then at the two creatures holding every other direction, and understood they wanted him to take that one route. Ryan stared at the narrow trail in front of him, then slowly stepped between 2 rows of trees bent into low arches. The large Bigfoot stayed behind him, while the red-furred individual moved along the slope to his left, always close enough to force him forward. The path tightened, the ground mixing loose stone with branches, arranged into repeating structures. On several tree trunks, Ryan saw muddy handprints, clumps of fur caught in bark, and young branches twisted in the same direction. They looked more like markers than random forest damage. From the rock gully, ahead came a weak sound, almost like a muffled groan. Ryan stopped and looked back at the two creatures. The large one released a low vibration in its chest, while the smaller one tilted its head toward the sound. He understood they wanted him to go closer. After passing a moss-covered boulder, Ryan found a steel cable trap hidden under leaves. The cable was still tight, with reddish-brown fur and dried tissue caught in the loop. A few steps away were bullet casings, cord, boot prints, and a smashed trail camera. Everything showed someone had deliberately set traps in this area. Ryan knelt, studied the lock mechanism, and took the multi-tool from his saddlebag. He began to understand why the two Bigfoot had reacted to his GoPro and bear spray. In their eyes, those objects could make him look like the people who had invaded before. Ryan slid the pliers into the cable and used all his strength to cut the wire still under tension. The metal snapped hard, lashed against the ground, then lay still. The smaller Bigfoot stood between 2 trees, watching every movement. Ryan continued, removing the steel loop from the root, gathered the wire into a bundle, and placed it in the open. The large one came forward, bent low, smelled the cut wire, and looked directly at Ryan. Its gaze remained cautious, but the distance between them no longer closed. Ryan stepped back, keeping both hands open in front of his chest. For several seconds, the entire forest settled into a heavy quiet. Then the large creature shifted aside, revealing a slope leading down toward the main road. Ryan had just realized he might be allowed to leave, when from the upper slope, The sound of an off-road vehicle grew louder. Lights swept across the canopy, followed by metal striking metal and men's voices echoing into the gully. Both creatures changed posture. The smaller one lowered its shoulders, while the large one turned toward the sound, its entire body tightening. Ryan looked up at the beam sweeping between the trees. The ATV engine came with the sound of tires grinding over gravel and two men talking. For that instant, he thought he had found people who could help. The red-furred Bigfoot lowered its body, while the larger one turned its shoulders toward the slope and released a deep vibration that made leaves at Ryan's feet tremble. Ryan shouted that he was lost and needed help getting out of the forest. A man's voice called down, asking who was below. Ryan stepped forward several paces, raised his light so they could see him. The two Bigfoot retreated deeper into the trees, disappearing so quickly that only shaking branches remained. Ryan thought the arrival of humans had forced them away. But when the ATV light swept through the rock gully, he heard one man say they had to find the camera before it got fully dark. That sentence made Ryan stop. He remembered the smashed trail camera, the steel wires, and the fur caught in the trap. Ryan turned off his light, retreated behind a boulder, and watched the slope above. Two men in hunting clothes appeared between the trees. The first carried a rifle, the other carried a coil of steel cable and a large sack. They moved down the trail with the confidence of people who had used the area many times. Ryan heard the man with the rifle talk about the red one being injured and the old male breaking 3 traps. The other man asked whether the buyer would still pay if the creature was badly hurt. The answer made Ryan understand they were not rangers or ordinary hunters. He took out his phone, started recording audio, and tilted the GoPro through a crack in the rock to record both men. One was named Cole Mercer, the other Travis Bell. Travis seemed tense and kept glancing into the forest, while Cole only cared about the missing trail camera and the fresh prints around the gully. When Ryan shifted his foot to keep balance, a pebble rolled from the edge of the rock. Cole immediately turned, aimed the gun at the sound, and walked slowly down. The light, mounted under his barrel, swept across the boulder and stopped close to where Ryan was hiding. Cole spoke coldly, ordering the person below to step out and put the camera down, because he knew Ryan had seen too much. Ryan slowly stepped out from behind the boulder, both hands raised at chest height so Cole could see he was not holding a weapon. Travis stood behind, his eyes constantly shifting toward the dark spaces between trees, while Cole kept the muzzle aimed straight at Ryan and asked what he had recorded. Ryan answered that he was lost. His bike was broken, and he only wanted to get down to the main road. Cole pointed toward the ATV on the slope and said they could take him out if he handed over the GoPro and phone. Ryan asked why. Cole explained that private survey work was happening in the area and any footage could cause trouble. The way he spoke was so calm that Ryan understood. The offer was really an order. Ryan said the camera had automatically uploaded the footage to the cloud, even though the GoPro had no connection. The lie made Cole hesitate, and Travis immediately asked whether the police had received anything. At that moment, a deep knock sounded from the trees on the right. Travis flinched, raised his gun, and fired into the dark before Cole could stop him. The shot echoed through the gully, followed by a low howl of pain from deeper in the forest. Branches across the way shook violently. The large Bigfoot burst from the dark, slammed Travis to the ground with a sweep of its shoulder, then turned toward Cole. Cole fired twice more, muzzle flashes cutting between the tree trunks. Ryan ducked low and ran across the edge of the gully, while Cole backed up and Travis tried to crawl toward the rifle he had dropped. As he ran, Ryan saw the red-furred Bigfoot appear near a fern patch, one leg dragging slightly and the fur along its side darkened. He understood the cry of pain had belonged to it. Near Travis's feet, an ATV key ring had fallen on the ground. Ryan snatched it and ran down the slope. The large Bigfoot had just opened through the brush. Behind him, the creature turned back to face the two armed men, while Ryan was ignored even though he had passed only a few steps away. That made him realize it had recognized who the real threat was. When Ryan reached lower ground, he opened the map and saw the main road just over a mile away. His phone suddenly caught one bar of signal, the message with coordinates sent immediately. Ryan gripped the phone, hearing boots crushing dry leaves as they came faster down the slope behind him. He had just seen the word "sent" when Cole's voice sounded directly behind him, asking what he had just transmitted. Ryan spun when Cole's voice came from behind him. The man stood less than 20 meters away, rifle lowered but finger near the trigger. Travis appeared behind him with a torn shoulder and a pale face from pain. Cole asked who Ryan had sent the coordinates to, then took another step, his calm voice making the threat even clearer. Ryan turned off the phone screen, shoved it into his jacket pocket, and backed toward the low trees. He said the message had gone to his coworker, and police would soon know they were on Road 68. Cole looked at Travis, then ordered Ryan to hand over the GoPro and phone, so everyone still had a chance to leave the forest before full dark. Ryan understood that if he surrendered the evidence, those two men would control the entire story, and his disappearance could be treated as an accident. He spun and ran down the skid trail. Cole and Travis chased him, their boots striking leaves between shouts, ordering him to stop. Cole did not shoot because he needed the camera intact. Ryan heard him tell Travis to circle right, and cut him off, proving they knew the terrain better than he did. When he reached a thick bush, Ryan threw the ATV keys deep to the left. Metal struck stone, making both men behind him slow. Cole swore, ordered Travis to find the keys, and continued downward. Ryan used those seconds to slip into a rock hollow, shut off his light, and press himself against the wall. Cole passed only a few steps away, saying the video could ruin everything they had prepared for months. Travis answered from above that they should go back because the big male was still around. Cole reminded him that the traps, cameras, and their names had all appeared in the footage. When the footsteps faded, Ryan used his phone to take 2 blurry pictures of them and typed another message to Melissa, warning that 2 armed men were in the forest. The status still showed sending. From the right slope, a knock sounded. 3 others answered one by one from different directions, forming an arc around the forest. Cole stopped. Ryan heard him mutter that they had to get out before midnight because the whole group would return after hearing the gunshots, and then it would be too late. After the series of knocks, the rhythm of the forest around Ryan changed. The scattered sounds from earlier began appearing from many directions, sometimes close, sometimes far, but always forming an arc, tightening around the area. Ryan stayed hidden in the rock hollow, watching Cole and Travis stop on the trail. Travis kept turning, trying to locate the source of the noise, while Cole raised the rifle higher and signaled for him to be quiet. A large branch shook violently on the right. Then a tall shadow moved between 2 pines. Cole immediately fired a warning shot. The gunshot had barely echoed into the ravine when a large rock flew from the opposite slope and smashed into the tree beside him with enough force to explode the bark. Travis stepped back, his voice trembling as he said they should drop the guns and leave. Cole brushed that aside, reminding him that the camera, traps, and remaining equipment hidden in the woods would all become evidence if someone found them. Ryan understood the knocks were no longer focused on him. They were following the 2 men who had fired guns and set traps. He used their argument to leave the rock hollow and move down toward the creek through a narrow path between ferns. After several dozen meters, Ryan met a line of branches stacked across the trail, knee-high and fresh at the breaks. The structure had clearly just been made. He climbed over it, fell lightly on the other side, and saw another narrow trail continuing downward. Ryan took reflective tape from his backpack and tied a piece around a tree so he would not circle back. As soon as he stood, he caught a glimpse of a smaller shadow running on all fours near the edge of the path, low-bodied but still larger than a child. That detail made him understand there might be young ones in the area, and the entire violent reaction was connected to protecting them. From the mountainside above, 2 more knocks answered each other, closer than before, making Ryan realize the creatures were closing both the return route and the path down to the creek. Behind him, Travis shouted Cole's name. A gunshot rang out. Then came a heavy impact, followed by silence. Ryan looked back through the trees and saw only distant branches shaking in a line, moving quickly downhill toward him. Ryan kept following the trail down, but after a few dozen meters, the GoPro light swept across a warped sheet metal roof, hidden behind moss-covered brush. It was an old maintenance cabin. The porch had collapsed. The wooden door hung crooked from one hinge, and vines covered the windows. He stepped inside and pulled the door just far enough closed to keep light from escaping. The smell of damp wood and rusted metal filled the small room. On the table sat an oil lamp, several chipped enamel cups, and a thick notebook curled at the edges from water damage. Ryan opened the notebook and saw the first pages recorded road maintenance schedules from the logging crew of 1997. Farther in, the entries shifted away from ordinary reports. Workers had written about machines being pelted with stones, fuel lines cut, knocks surrounding the camp after dark, and a man named Harris disappearing near Route 68. One underlined page said company management had ordered the crew to keep quiet to avoid shutting down logging. On the back wall hung an old map, with an oval area marked in red ink, matching the missing data patch Ryan had once seen in satellite images. Beneath it was a crooked handwritten note, "Leave before 4 p.m. Do not answer the knocks." Ryan tore the map from its pins, rolled it with the notebook, and pushed both inside his jacket. He tried turning on an old radio on a shelf, but the battery was swollen and the buttons produced only weak clicks. At that moment, the cabin door shifted. Travis stepped inside, one hand holding his shoulder, blood soaking through the hunting shirt. His gun was gone, his breathing broken, and his eyes kept darting outside. Travis begged Ryan to help him find Cole, saying Cole had the satellite locator and spare vehicle keys. Ryan kept distance and asked why the creatures were concentrated around this area. Travis lowered his head for a few seconds, then admitted Cole had captured a young one 3 days earlier and locked it near the old quarry while waiting for a buyer. From the mountainside, a weak groan echoed back. Then the large Bigfoot answered with a deep call that made the cabin tremble. Travis looked at Ryan, knowing that secret had been exposed. Ryan stared at Travis in the dark cabin, trying to connect the confession with the way the 2 Bigfoot had driven him through the forest. If the young one was being held near the quarry, the creatures may have watched him, caught the trap, and seen him as the only human close enough to open the cage. Travis wanted to find the locator and leave the area, but Ryan believed abandoning the young one would keep the entire group blocking every exit. After several seconds of argument, they left the cabin and followed the skid road toward the quarry. Travis moved slowly because of his shoulder wound, while Ryan kept distance and always watched both his hands. From the forest, knocks sounded in short beats, guiding them in the right direction. When they reached the edge of the quarry, Ryan saw Cole pulling a tarped transport cage toward an off-road vehicle hidden under a rock overhang. Inside the cage came weak impacts and a hoarse groan. Cole turned, aimed the rifle at Ryan, and demanded the camera. Travis immediately stepped to Cole's side, saying they should recover the equipment and leave before the adults arrived. That trail of prey made Ryan understand Travis had never truly chosen to stand with him. Ryan slowly removed the GoPro from his helmet, pretending he was about to hand it over, while pressing the button to keep recording. Ryan said the coordinates had been sent, and police were on the way, though he still was not sure any message had actually left the area. Above the cliff, the large Bigfoot appeared between two trees, its entire body tense but holding position. Cole immediately moved the muzzle close to the tarp covering the cage, forcing the creature to stop. Ryan realized the Bigfoot understood that a charge could make the young one get shot. That restraint made the situation even heavier. While Cole focused on the cliff, Ryan studied the cage and saw its wheels resting right at the edge of a slope. The brake latch was only a few steps from his foot. Travis began backing toward the off-road vehicle, while Cole ordered Ryan to kneel. Ryan shifted his foot as if losing balance, moving closer to the brake a little at a time. When Cole turned and shouted, Ryan suddenly kicked the latch hard. The cage shook, then slowly rolled out of position, picking up speed down the rocky incline, in front of all three men. The cage shot down the rocky slope, striking raised stones and tilting with each bounce. Cole swung the rifle toward it, but Ryan slammed into his shoulder, sending the shot high into the quarry wall. The gunshot echoed through the open space, followed by a burst of frantic knocks from the surrounding trees. Travis ran after the cage, trying to grab the handle and save what he still saw as valuable evidence. The wheels struck a rock, and the whole metal frame flipped onto its side, slid several more feet, and stopped near a dry ditch. The tarp came loose, revealing a small creature covered in dark red fur curled inside, its back leg wrapped in a steel loop. On the cliff, the large Bigfoot lowered its body and jumped down. Its landing blasted stone dust around its feet. Cole had just stood when the creature knocked him aside with one sweep of its arm. His body rolled across gravel and struck a metal crate. The Bigfoot turned toward the cage, eyes locked on the young one. Ryan ran to the cage door and found the lock still intact. He pulled twice, but the door only shook. Travis stood nearby, gripping the key ring, his face torn between greed and fear. Ryan demanded he open it, reminding him that large shadows were appearing along the rim of the quarry. One, then two, then several more tall shapes stepped between the trees, forming a ring around the area. Travis looked at Cole, crawling toward the rifle, then threw the keys to Ryan. Ryan caught them and tried the first key, then the second. The lock snapped open. Ryan pulled the cage door aside and backed away. The young one crawled out, dragging its injured back leg over the loose stone. The large Bigfoot approached, bent down to inspect the wound, then lifted the small creature with both arms. Behind them, Cole had reached the rifle. He pulled the trigger, but the mechanism jammed from the impact. The dry metal click made every Bigfoot turn. The large one released a deep call. The individuals around the quarry retreated into the forest together, opening a corridor toward the main road. Ryan was about to run through it when he reached for his helmet and realized the GoPro was gone. Its red light was still blinking beside Cole. Ryan looked at the open corridor and knew he only had to run down it for a chance to reach the main road. But the red light of the GoPro still blinked beside Cole. The camera held all the evidence of the chase, the traps, the two poachers, and the moment Bigfoot protected the young one. If he left it, Cole could destroy it, and Ryan's disappearance would become just another accident in the forest. He took a few steps back, even as Travis yelled that they had to leave the quarry immediately. Cole had picked up the GoPro, with the jammed rifle still in his other hand. He said Ryan could walk away if he handed over the phone and forgot everything he had seen. Ryan stood a few meters away and answered that the data had already gone out, though he himself did not know which messages had actually sent. Cole looked at the camera, then suddenly threw it toward the edge of the quarry. Ryan lunged after it and caught the strap before the device hit the slope, but his foot slipped on gravel. His body tipped toward the drop, both knees slamming hard into stone. Travis grabbed the back of his collar and pulled him away. In that chaos, Cole crawled to the gun, clutched the locator, and ran toward the forest road. The large Bigfoot turned because of the noise, standing in the quarry with the young one in its arms, eyes moving from Cole to Ryan, as if judging the remaining threat. Ryan reattached the GoPro to his helmet and saw the camera was still working, but the battery was below 15%. He and Travis ran toward the corridor. The Bigfoot group had opened, hearing Cole start an ATV hidden farther off. Travis wanted to follow the vehicle to get the spare keys, but Ryan thought the path down to the creek was safer. The two argued between gasping breaths. Then Travis suddenly turned toward the engine sound. Ryan kept running downhill, holding his phone against his chest and refusing to look back. A few seconds later, the ATV engine surged, followed by a violent crash and the sound of the motor cutting out. Travis called Cole's name, but the forest answered with only 3 knocks. Ryan had just reached the trees near the main road when the large Bigfoot stepped out in front of him. Behind him, another creature appeared too, slowly closing the circle once more. Ryan stood in the narrow forest path, the large Bigfoot in front, the same one that had carried the young creature out of the quarry, and another creature emerging behind him from the dark. He raised both hands and tried to keep his voice steady, saying he had helped open the cage and only wanted to return to the main road. The large one did not advance, but its eyes stopped on the red blinking light of the GoPro mounted to Ryan's helmet. That moment made him remember the smashed trail camera, Cole's reaction to recording devices, and the way the two creatures had followed him from the very beginning. Ryan understood that what they cared about might not be the backpack, food, or bicycle, but the object recording everything. He slowly removed the GoPro from his helmet, held it in front of his chest, and placed it on the leaves. The smaller Bigfoot tilted its head, watching every movement of the camera. Ryan backed up 2 steps and turned toward the lower road. The large one immediately shifted sideways, blocking the path as if that action still was not enough. Ryan took the phone from his pocket, placed it beside the GoPro, and said clearly that he would leave all the devices behind. The phone screen was still lit, showing pending messages and a nearly dead battery. Ryan looked at his jacket pocket, remembering the backup memory card inside, but he did not dare reach for it, afraid the movement would be taken as a threat. He opened both hands and stepped back once more. The large creature bent to look at the GoPro, then lifted its eyes and studied Ryan with an impossible focus. Several seconds passed. At last it moved away from the path, revealing the woods leading toward the main road. Ryan began walking, slowly at first, then faster as he saw the open space ahead. Behind him, branches broke again in rhythm with his steps. Both Bigfoot still followed, close enough for him to hear their heavy breathing between the sound of water in the ravine. Ryan turned and said he had left the camera and phone behind. The large one kept moving, eyes never leaving him. The darkness around him closed, step by step. Then, Ryan understood the GoPro may have been only the first reason they noticed him. What they truly wanted to stop was the person who had seen too much. The GoPro lay tilted on the damp leaves, its lens aimed at the gap between 2 rows of trees. Ryan appeared in the distance, running toward the main road, with steps losing rhythm from exhaustion. Behind him, the large Bigfoot entered the frame, its full body becoming clearer in the weak light of late day. It did not need to speed up, because each stride was almost twice Ryan's, and the distance between them steadily narrowed. Ryan looked back, then changed direction toward the creek edge, when the Sasquatch creature suddenly appeared ahead. The way the 2 Bigfoot moved forced him back into the forest, as if the exit had only been a false option. Ryan shouted that he had left the camera and phone behind, but his voice was quickly swallowed by water and breaking branches. He ran past the GoPro the first time, his face muddy, lips dry, breathing broken. Behind him, the 2 creatures kept formation, the large one pressing from the left, the smaller one cutting right. Ryan pulled the spare bike light from his backpack, set it to flashing mode, and threw it hard, toward the slope. Red light spun through the trunks, creating a clear target. The smaller one tilted its head toward it for a moment, but did not leave position. Ryan used that brief second to circle back toward the camera. He bent as if to pick up the GoPro, his hand touching the strap, but the large Bigfoot appeared behind him, and he let go and ran again. The second time Ryan crossed the frame, the distance was close enough for the camera to clearly record his wide eyes and the scratch on his cheek. He slid down the creek bank, grabbed a trunk, and vanished beneath the ferns. The two Bigfoot followed, one taking each side of the water. Only seconds later, all three were gone from the frame. The forest returned to wind and running water, with no scream and no sound of struggle. The camera kept recording empty ground, while drops from a low branch fell onto the lens, making the image tremble beneath the cold red indicator light. From far away, 3 slow knocks sounded, evenly spaced like a signal completed. 7 minutes later, a large shadow returned to the GoPro, stopped just outside the edge of the frame, and stood still, as if inspecting the device before deciding to step closer. That night, Melissa Grant received only Ryan's first message, saying he had started the ride and would send video if the view was good. She replied almost an hour later, but the message was not read. Near midnight, Melissa's phone finally showed the coordinates and warning about 2 men with guns on Road 68. She called again and again. Every call went to voicemail. Melissa contacted Jefferson County Police, saying Ryan always reported when he changed plans and rarely allowed his phone battery to die. Because the coordinates were not precise, the night shift could only identify the general Olympic Peninsula area. The next morning, Walter Briggs remembered the man who had stopped at the gas station and led police to the parking area at the start of Road 68. Ryan's Toyota Tacoma was still there, locked with his wallet, spare jacket, and food bag untouched inside. Mark and Elaine Pearson returned too when they heard the news. Their dash camera clearly showed Ryan riding through the gate at 4:24 and never coming back, out the same way. The search team walked up the route, called Ryan's name, and checked the drainage cuts. They found the newly broken tree blocking the road, then discovered the bike lying on its side, beside the skid trail, its rear wheel bent out of the frame, and the chain jammed deep in the derailleur. Ryan's backpack was found farther away near a wetland, but his phone and the man himself were both gone. 2 tracking dogs smelled the shirt taken from his truck and followed the scent down to the creek. When they reached the rotten trunk near the water, both dogs stopped, whined, and pulled backward. The handler tried leading them around the opposite slope, but they pressed close to the ground and refused to go deeper. In the mud were many blurred depressions, too washed out to identify the species. Police leaned toward the idea that Ryan had been injured and lost. Melissa repeatedly brought up the message about 2 armed men. Walter looked at the broken tree trunk, his face changing, and admitted he had seen that kind of break in 1997. By late afternoon, a volunteer called everyone over. Beneath wet leaves near the creek, he had found Ryan's GoPro. The light was off, but the memory card was still inside. The GoPro was sealed and taken to the Jefferson County investigation room that night. The device had taken in water, the shell was scratched, and the glass was covered in a thin layer of mud, but the memory card could still be read. Investigator Sarah Klein invited Thomas Reed, an image processing specialist who had worked with trail camera data, to help recover the footage. Melissa was allowed to sit at the back of the editing room, where 3 monitors displayed Ryan's final ride at the same time. The first minutes made her forget to breathe, because his voice was still calm, and the forest looked beautiful and familiar, like any weekend trip. When the camera swept across the mountainside as Ryan turned around, Thomas paused the frame and enlarged the dark area between 2 pines. A huge figure appeared, standing upright, broad-shouldered and taller than the surrounding brush. Based on distance, tree height, and the slope angle, Thomas estimated the creature measured from 7 feet 10 inches to more than 8 feet. He slowed the moment when the arm withdrew behind the tree. The forearm was long, the hand showed a clear thumb, and the recoil posture did not match the movement of a black bear. The audio was also separated into layers. It contained 2 different sets of footsteps, one heavy and slow, the other quicker, along with many knocks coming from separate positions. Melissa recognized Ryan's voice in the part where he read his name, location, and described a creature following him, proving the video was not a staged reenactment. Sarah ordered a search for Cole, Mercer, and Travis Bell, but hunting records and license lists in the area showed no matching names. Near the quarry, investigators found an ATV, damaged by impact and human blood on the handlebar. The blood did not belong to Ryan, and there was not enough data to identify the owner. The faces of the 2 men in the video were too dark for certain identification. The biggest debate centered on whether to release the footage. Sarah worried the images would draw Bigfoot hunters into the forest, damaging the scene and causing more disappearances. Thomas reviewed the file length and noticed the camera kept recording for nearly 3 hours after Ryan vanished. Right before the battery died, a giant shadow began slowly entering the frame. For nearly 3 hours after Ryan disappeared from view, the GoPro recorded only darkness, running water, and wind moving through wet leaves. Occasionally, the microphone captured a few distant knocks, but the gaps between them were too long to determine direction. At 8:47 p.m., the ferns behind the camera suddenly trembled. A large foot stepped into frame and sank deep into the mud. The creature crouched, revealing thick brown-black fur from wrist to shoulder. The weak light from the GoPro did not allow Thomas to determine whether it was the same Bigfoot that had chased Ryan or a different individual. It reached toward the device and lifted the camera with long, strong fingers. The image spun sharply, flashing across tree trunks, dark sky, and leaf-covered ground before stopping on the creature's face. It was so close that individual hairs around the cheekbones were visible, and the reflective eyes looked straight into the lens, with a focus that made the entire editing room silent. The creature tilted the GoPro left, then right, as if trying to understand the shape and function of the object. It lightly shook the device, observed the red indicator light, then brought the camera closer. Thomas paused frame by frame, but the face still showed no sign of panic or purely instinctive reaction. Its calm was more frightening than any roar. After several seconds, one large finger slowly moved toward the lens and covered the entire image. The sound continued. The microphone recorded the fingertip touching the plastic casing, a deep breath, and a low vibration containing 2 hard-to-separate syllables. The camera was set down, making the sound of dry leaves crushing under weight very clear. Thomas raised the volume at the end and discovered that behind the breathing was another sound, weaker and thinner, almost like a human voice. Melissa listened again and again, then said she believed the word was help. Thomas explained that the data was distorted by water, wind, and distance, so no conclusion could be made. When he enlarged the final frame before the lens was covered, he noticed a small metal object reflecting on the creature's wrist. Its shape resembled the buckle once attached to Ryan's backpack. Sarah ordered the original recording sealed, while the public report described it only as footage of an unidentified animal. What haunted Melissa most was the way the creature looked into the camera, recognized the place where the lens was watching, and deliberately covered it. The search for Ryan Foster lasted 11 days, using helicopters, thermal drones, tracking dogs, and dozens of volunteers familiar with the Olympic Peninsula. They searched ravines, creek banks, abandoned logging roads, and areas marked on the 1997 map, but found no body, shoes, clothing, or any clear trace showing which direction. Ryan had gone after he disappeared from the frame. His phone was never recovered. The locator device, belonging to Cole and Travis, disappeared along with the two men, and the damaged ATV near the quarry provided only a few bloodstains that could not identify the owner. After the official search ended, Road 68 was closed for slides, fallen trees, and unsafe conditions. The old sign gradually disappeared from public maps, turning the road into a name mentioned only in quiet conversations at the gas station or among people who had once worked in the forest. Melissa kept filing requests to reopen the case. She did not become a Bigfoot hunter, and she did not try to turn her brother into a symbol of a legend. What she wanted was an honest enough explanation of what the camera recorded and why the final section had been kept quiet for so long. Every year, in early October, Melissa returned to the dirt lot where Ryan had unloaded his bike. She placed flowers beside the metal gate and cleaned the small plaque bearing his name. 1 year later, the plaque disappeared. There were no clear boot prints in the soil, and the ties had not been cut, as if someone had lifted it away and carried it into the forest. Walter Briggs said the knocks around the gas station stopped for almost a month after the disappearance. In late November, he heard 3 knocks from the tree line behind the storage shed. The next morning, a mud-covered bike light lay on top of the trash bin, the same type Ryan had carried. Police took it, but without a serial number, it could not be confirmed. After that, reports of thrown stones and knocks around the road sharply decreased. 5 years later, a passing driver recorded 3 knocks near the entrance to Road 68. In the silence that followed, the microphone captured a faint metal sound like a small bell, attached to a bike handlebar. Ryan was never found. What remained was not only the question of whether he had died, been taken, or somehow survived somewhere in the forest. It was the possibility that those creatures understood humans well enough to decide who was allowed to leave their territory.